Well, hello and welcome to our podcast, the Make Heaven Crowded podcast. I am joined with Pastor Luke and Pastor Roger, and I am Pastor Jordan. And we are going to discuss Luke's very brief and short sermon from Sunday that he didn't really get to talk much on John and John's perspective of who Jesus is to John.
You guys are funny.
I didn't say anything. I didn't say anything.
All you could talk about yesterday.
No, it's a new day. It's a new day.
I looked up 11:47. That's all I saw.
Yeah,
You saw 11:47?
Yeah.
Oh, I saw 10:15. I guess we're two different times.
I'm in fresh start right now with first service. So
I got you.
I don't.
I'll
get to
give
go to
for
first
For
service.
those that were not there, you guys are just saying that.
Well, I will give
the message went a little long.
I will give you a little bit of slack in that of all the messages that you couldn't shorten, the direction you went of going through. I thought Jaden did a good job yesterday explaining it, that basically your first part of your message was actually rediscovering John, and then the second part was rediscovering Jesus. Whereas the week before, I didn't really give a lot of background on Mark. I gave kind of the context of why Jesus was speaking, and then I kind of went right into Mark chapter 8 on discipleship. You went deeper in explaining kind of the background, and so I think of all the messages to go long on, the way you did it, you couldn't have made that short. So
yeah, I'm talking about God's love. That's a good one to kind of go long. A little bit longer on, but
Kind of the point of the Bible, isn't it?
yeah, and that's what I was like. The whole point of the message. If we want to understand why John is saying what he's saying, we have to understand the source of his experience and who is saying it and why. Therefore, we understand why he is saying it. So, yeah, I did an introduction to John. Anything that you guys thought needed to be added to the introduction of John?
I think you could gone into how many times they tried to kill him.
Yeah, they did.
The unkillable man.
I'm not saying this to be sarcastic. There's nothing you could have added, nor should you have. I mean, you said it all. You left it all on the field. I think it's important, and I think sometimes as pastors and if you study the Bible a lot, you take for granted. Because I even said it yesterday. I'm like, well, a lot of that stuff they already know. Well, there's
I can't take
and
that
that's
for
what I'm
granted.
saying. You may have some people that are new to church, or maybe they're actually diving into the Bible in a way that they've never done it before, and so something as simple as like the Saul to Paul story or John and his life, like we assume some of those details are just basic details that everybody knows.
They're not.
Don't assume that. So.
Yeah, and that's, I think, part of that, too, is when we understand, I think we put in our mind when we first open up the Bible, maybe you've even been studying it for years, we have this picture of, like, the disciples and think they're almost like these superheroes. And now the Lord used them to do some supernatural stuff, but before they were called, they were just normal guys, right? And so I think there's part of, when we understand that they were just normal guys, that John was, he was just a, 15 to 20-year-old kid that when he first started following around Jesus, and how ambitious he was, and the things that he wanted to do. He wanted to call down fire from heaven, and Jesus gave him the nickname Son of Thunder. He wanted to sit at the right hand of Jesus in glory. Like all those different things, when we start to realize, oh, he was just another fisherman. He was a teenager at one point.
I've heard as young as 13.
Yeah, that's what I heard too.
Can you imagine? I mean, you've got a son that was 13.
Yep.
And I knew your son when he was 13.
I have a daughter that's 13.
You have a daughter that's 13. There are some like pretty advanced 13-year-olds in terms of maturity, but they're still 13, right? And so like it's just pretty incredible to think like John in this beginning of his ministry was probably a junior high student.
Well, yeah, and you also have to factor in that they grew up a whole lot faster back then.
Yeah, they didn't have YouTube and TikTok.
Like, we were even talking about longevity of our relatives and how you had a grandma that lived to 98. I had a great-grandma that lived to 106. That great-grandma was also married at 14.
Yeah, different world.
Yeah. And my grandpa was 16. So
you had to grow up quick.
Yeah,
and
so, great-grandpa.
Even still, though, it's like, man, 13 years old is pretty incredible. And, of course, you go into the story of the Virgin Mary and, like, when she was called and just some of these people that, we think were extraordinary. A lot of them were lived very mundane lives up until they were called. And in John's case, I mean, my goodness, just his age and what he brought to the table at that point was very little.
Well, the other thing that was fascinating was how long he lived for that day.
The only one.
I mean, you said 80s to 90s possibly. That is ancient.
Yeah.
I mean, in those days. I mean, we've been going through Paul's letters in my class on Wednesday night. And in his pastoral epistles with Peter and Titus, or Timothy and Titus, he highlights his age. He's kind of winding ministry down because he's passing the baton to Timothy and Titus in many respects. But it talks about he's in his 50s or 60s, which would have been, and he even calls himself, I'm an old man.
Yeah.
But he'd also, because he had been through a lot, and to think that 60 is an old man for Paul, and then for John to be 80s and 90s. I mean, he's old
Well,
man.
germ theory was nowhere near. I mean, in terms of the science, and I mean, of what people dying of the teeth because of there was no modern medicine, obviously, and so to live to be 80 or 90, you are like in the Guinness Book of World Records.
Diarrhea was the number one cause of death.
Yeah, literally. I mean, that's and
I was there 2 weeks ago.
I was gonna say,
I thought I was going to.
You were hoping to go
Like,
see
it was-
Jesus.
Yes, yeah.
that's when you're
bad.
ChatGPTing, can you die from diarrhea?
Yeah, it was horrible.
And the answer is no. But
Or it was the top three.
Today.
I can't remember if it was number one or
well, I know,
three,
like
but it was
literally,
top three.
I mean, teeth infections of the tooth was a very common side effect of death. And then you're like, man, 1,700 years later, George Washington is getting leached to death because even then they're not caught up on it. So it's like, don't take for granted what we have. But yes, John living to that age when all of his brothers, looking at all the other apostles, are getting stoned to death or crucified or thrown off the temple, like all of them are dying these brutal deaths. And yet John was the one with the longevity to make it as long as he did.
Yeah, whatever his age is, we know he was the youngest when they started following around. The reason, I know it could have been the youngest 13 in my studies of learning about him going up. Age of 13, he would have still been in apprenticeship age. And so, like where Jesus called him when he's out on the boat with his dad, at 13, he would not have been a partner with his dad in the boat at that point.
Quite yet.
Yeah. And so that's why many scholars believe he was just a couple years older. So they range it between probably 15 to that 20-year range.
So he's
And
still
also,
testing for a permit.
and
either
so
way.
when people would also when
Still
people
15.
when people were leaving home to follow a rabbi, a teacher, that normally came around that 15, 16-year-old range because the rabbi wanted somebody that could be self-dependent, all that different things as they were following around, face persecution and different
Still
things.
young,
So,
too,
yeah,
and
still
to our
still
world.
very young. But I think knowing all that kind of helps identify who who John was.
Well, one of the other things I know this always cracks me up is when he was given the name Sons of Thunder when they wanted to call down fire onto I can't remember who it was that kind of insulted Jesus and them. It cracks me up because he is asking the one who has the authority to call down fire from heaven, do you want us to call down fire from heaven?
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, do you realize what you're asking for there? Yeah. And Jesus had to have been just kind of like, you have no idea what you're talking about right now, and you're asking the one who can if you can. That was just always seemed strange to me.
I think it shows, number one, his heart, but also his age, because you know your kids, whenever they ask you something, it's like, oh, you don't even know what you're like. You don't know what you're asking.
And he was genuinely thought he could.
But yet he still believed that God could
Elijah
give him the
something.
power to be able to do so. So part of that
But when he's standing right in front of God, though, that's just an odd thing.
Overall, like as we talked about in the message, challenge you to go back, listen to it, because we did talk about why John's gospel is different. And so it follows different format and everything from Matthew, Mark, and Luke. We talked about that in detail last week on the podcast and then in the message. But big part of John's teaching as he goes throughout his book is he has these long theological discourses, and so he goes into like some of these deep, intimate teachings of who Jesus is, and it's almost written as like a reflecting back, obviously later on in his life, somebody that's older, 80s. If he was 18 to 20. That would have put him around 85 whenever he passed. And so as an older man, reflecting back on his life, having this conversation, but the things that he emphasizes throughout his entire gospel is the aspects that revealed God being love. And so that was really cool for me to study is, how do we know that God is love? It's through John's gospel. I mean, he, in his gospel alone, 57 times uses that term, love. That's like 10 times more than any other gospel. And then you count in his letters, that's another 47 times he uses the term love. So,
Paul's got to beat him.
Well,
1 Corinthians 13 alone is like every other word is love.
I'm just talking about compared to other gospel writers.
I know, that's what I'm saying. I'm wondering what it would be compared to Paul, because Paul really focused on the love as well. That'd be interesting.
Yeah, that'd be interesting to find. Jaden, look up how many times Paul uses love in his letters. What'd
you say John's number was?
John, he was 57 times just in his gospel, and then I believe it was like 46 or 47 times in his letters.
Okay. Yeah, that'd be a tough one to beat.
Yeah. And so, that was a major emphasis. But even the stories he told, and, the big story that we get, and it's kind of crazy. He comes out of the gate swinging, talking about his conversation with Nicodemus. And, we went through John 3. There's a lot in John 3 that we did not talk about, but we talked about a lot in John 3. And so as we open up our Bibles to John 3, and we see he's having this conversation with Nicodemus, who's a Pharisee, and he's a leader representing a Jewish council.
You asked, can we just call him something else like Nick?
Yeah.
Well, The Chosen calls him Nico.
Yeah.
That's his nickname on The Chosen. His wife calls him Nico.
Nico.
Just call him Nico.
I'm not his wife. We can call him Nico or Nick. And so
Nico,
either one, better. Nico. So Nico, he brings Jesus' question, and he comes, a few different things. He comes at night. And we talked about, we emphasized that on Sunday. And that part jumped out to me because growing up, I always just thought, it's because he was ashamed that he was going to Jesus, or he wanted to hide from his counterparts that he was going and talking to Jesus. And I think that very much has a part in it. But as you know, I began to study. It's like, a big emphasis is Jesus being the light of the world, and the light coming into the darkness, and the darkness will not overcome. Going all the way back to John 1:1, talking about Jesus being the God of the cosmos. Okay, now Nicodemus is coming at night. What is that revealing? Well, that night, that darkness represents he is spiritually dark. So even though he's going through all the actions that makes him seem like that he is doing everything right, that he's a person of the light, he's actually spiritually dark. And so I think there's like a hidden meaning there, maybe not hidden, but, significance of him coming in at night. And so, Nico comes and talks to Jesus. And can you imagine sitting face to face with Jesus? And
wow,
we made a joke like in two Coleman chairs, just sitting there talking to Jesus, asking him all these different questions. And Jesus being like, how do you not get this? And
that's been the fascinating thing with the Pharisees is as he would challenge them and he would kind of call them out as, the scriptures better than anybody. Why don't you understand this? And he's kind of doing the same right there with Nicodemus. And that's always pretty fascinating. And I appreciated how you've commented that they just go through the motions. They were checking the boxes. It was all about appearances and look at me and I'm doing all the right things. Mm-hmm. But that's one of the key things that Jesus really highlights is the heart.
Yeah.
And where's the heart behind it? And are you just doing this to look good for yourself or to check those boxes and think, okay, I'm righteous and I'm going to go to heaven. And oh, by the way, I'm from the line of Abraham. Yeah. I'm good. Jesus is like, no, not at all. And that's obviously what he starts to spell out to Nico.
Yeah. And that's really what Jesus is getting at is these things that you are doing, spiritual disciplines, they can either be done out of reverence for the Lord, or they can bring upon, it can be done in a bad vein. And so it all goes back to the heart posture behind it. And that's what he was getting at with Nico is like, say, hey, you have to be born again. You're doing all the things to make you, quote unquote, clean, but yet you're doing them with the wrong heart posture because you haven't been truly born again. And that's where he goes into talking about like, born again, how can that even happen?
I can't go back into my mother's womb.
Yeah. How do we do that? And that's where he goes into the details of, hey, born of the water and of the Spirit. And we talked about how there's many different translations when it comes to different stuff like that.
I'd have to kind of give Nicodemus a little bit of leeway there because I would want to. Can you clarify what you mean by being born again? Because I would also say that I don't know if the Old Testament prophets and anywhere in the Old Testament does it really explicitly, clearly explain born again.
Well, the idea of religion up to Christ was that follow this doctrine and your life will improve in this way, this way, this way. You will live a more fulfilled life. You'll live longer. You'll be healthier. You won't die of shellfish allergies or from eating swine that is raw or what. All of these ideas is how can I better myself, and that's one of the components of the gospel that I tell people all the time. If you want to improve your old self, try Tybo. There's all kinds of different life coaches you can hire. If you want to improve yourself, go to the library, and there's a whole section on self-help. If you want to be a new creation, that is where Christ did not come to improve the old. He came to create something brand new. And we hear that and we're thinking, well, yeah, that's basic Christian principles. We understand that. Prior to Jesus, that was a completely foreign concept. This idea of being a new creation would have been confusing, not just to Nicodemus, but any Pharisee that had studied the Bible left and right. So,
and I'd even go on to say that Paul talks about how that was a mystery. that God kept hidden on purpose, how Jesus is going to fulfill all this, how he was going to save the humanity.
The mystery of salvation.
Yeah, it just, so I got to give Nicodemus a little bit of credit there that I'd want some clarification.
Yeah. Well, in the first part that he talks about is like, what does it mean to be born again? He explains like, hey, got to be born of the water and of the Spirit. And we, the different way people would translate that, what does that mean? We talked about, hey, the first one, some people mean, oh, well, that means you have to have a natural birth. And then you also have to have like a spiritual birth. And so they're talking about, when your mom's pregnant and you're born that way, and then you're born again there. I don't think that's what Jesus is talking about here with Nicodemus, because they're not talking about biology. And I think he would be stating the obvious. It's like, you have to be born, type of deal. And then the second way people talk about it, and I think we do hear it a lot from our Catholic brothers and sisters, that's where they go to, where you have to be born of water and of the Spirit, and talking about baptism. And so that's why you have to be, sprinkled as a baby, or even people put it into works of like, hey, you have to be baptized. But what does that do? It makes baptism a requirement for salvation of being born again, because it's saying, hey, that is required. You would have to make the argument that Jesus is requiring it there for salvation.
Baptismal regeneration.
Right. And then, probably what he's referencing, because he even tells Nicodemus, well, how do you not know these things? Like, how do you not know this? And that's probably when he's talking about Ezekiel. And so what we see Jesus do in Ezekiel is tell them like, hey, this is a requirement of what must take place. Let me find the passage. Yeah, Ezekiel 36, 25 through 27. I'll sprinkle clean water on you, and you will be clean. I will give you a new heart and put a new spirit in you. Most likely what Jesus is doing right here is referencing back to Ezekiel 36, where he's talking about, hey, yes, you need to be cleansed of your sin, but also you need to be born into a new spirit, and that's the what it means to be born again. And so he's referencing those two things, and also the reason we believe that he's referencing back to Ezekiel 36 is actually a part of the John 3 that we did not get into on Sunday, and that is the very next section wherever, because right after he explains this, Nicodemus asks, how can this be? And then Jesus explains what? He explains that he's going to be raised up on a cross, which we know is what makes us clean of our sin, so that we can be born again. So anything else in there about the water and the Spirit that you guys thought we need to talk about right now?
No, I mean, you covered a lot in your sermon.
Yeah, we did. And he talked about, reference to the wind. He compared it to the wind, like, hey, you may not know, you can't see where it comes from, you don't know where it's going, but you know it's there. That's how he describes the Spirit, and this is the first teaching of like the Holy Spirit that we see. We obviously see the Spirit come up in pregnancies with John the Baptist and different stuff like that, but this is the first time he teaches on it. But then the point that I didn't really get to talk about, and he goes into John 3, 10 through 15, so right before John 3:16, he tells this story about the Son of Man must be raised up on a stick, like Moses did the serpent, snake, in the wilderness. So, Jordan, do you want to kind of tell that story of what happened in the wilderness, like why Moses had to raise up that stake and all that stuff with the snake?
Well, yeah, you're going to make me dig deep. I haven't read that in a while, but from what I recall, Israelites were probably doing some grumbling and causing a lot of problems, and so poisonous snakes show up, and they're all being bitten, and I'm assuming some probably died, but definitely falling ill. And so God instructs Moses to fashion this symbolism of a snake. I don't know if it was a literal snake, but probably some kind of iron or something like that. Put it on a stick, and if you were bitten by this snake, you were supposed to go to that pole where the snake was, and you'd be healed from the snake bite. Wild, crazy thing. And I don't know if you've ever noticed on ambulances, they have a stick with a snake wrapped around it. Mm-hmm. And now some people also associate that to Greek god. Obviously, there's always these replicas of the real thing that are in Greek mythology or in other lowercase g god beliefs. And so it doesn't discount, well, now where they got that from for what's on the ambulance, is it from the Bible or is it from Greek god? I can't say that for sure, but it definitely is a symbolism to that story. Now, did I leave anything out? Does that
No,
sound
no.
pretty accurate?
Yep.
Okay.
Sounds good.
For the old guy to dig deep into the recesses of his brain.
Yeah, and I put you on the spot, and yeah, you're exactly right. And 3,000 still ended up dying.
Yeah.
And that all came about is because they were doing things their own way in the wilderness. And
A lot of grumbling.
A lot of grumbling. But that analogy of the serpent, I think that runs deep. Especially through the first 5 books of the Torah. Then
Yeah.
Jesus, overcome that. So the first time we obviously see the serpent step into play is in Genesis, right? And in Genesis, he shows up to Eve, says, "Hey, did God really say that? You can eat from this fruit. Sin enters into the world." God then curses the serpent, but he also, when he curses the wife, when he curses Eve, he says, "What's going to happen? You're going to have, number one, pain during childbirth." So that's crazy. Now we're in John 3. You got a serpent come up, got childbirth coming back up, talking about being born again. But then it says one is going to come from your line that is going to crush the serpent. The serpent will bite its heel, but he will crush it on its head. Mm-hmm. We fast forward and go through the next book in the Bible after Genesis is Exodus. We then see the serpent show back up when in regards to Moses' staff, right? Whenever he is doubting God, what does God turn his staff into?
Snake.
Snap turns it into a snake. Then he tells him to pick it up and grab it, and then it does what? Turns back into a staff. Now we get out into the wilderness.
If you don't like snakes, you'd be like, no,
yeah,
I'm not.
I can't imagine. Like, Lord, anything else?
Yeah.
Tell me
cat
to punch a shark in the mouth instead of pick up that snake. And then the next time we see it come up is in the wilderness when this takes place. And so whether it was however he had a snake to fashion onto there, whether it was God actually just turned a snake into a gold staff, whatever took place, that's what it does. And all of that was to, again, he had that to reverse the curse of the snake bite all of them had. Well, now we see, he says, hey, just like they came to that for healing and to be cleansed of that curse from the snake, just like the curse of sin has entered into the world, Jesus one day is going to be raised up, and you will be cleansed of the curse of sin on your life because of his death on the cross.
Crazy.
That's what's going to make you clean. That's what is going to wash you clean. So the few verses right there, 10 through 15, there's a lot that goes into play right there. And
a lot of history to it.
Deep analogies and things that Jesus is referencing back to. But he gets to all that to say, hey, I got to die on that cross. That's all going to happen so that you can be clean. Why? So you can be born again. And that all is like, okay, verse 16, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son. Whoever believes in him will not perish, but have everlasting life. And so you have to have that first part to understand, hey, we have to be cleansed of our sin, which is nothing by our works, only by the work of Jesus on the cross, so that if we believe in him, we then will have eternal life. It is the first step, is our sin being cleansed, so that we can receive and accept that love over our life and receive that eternal life.
But then what comes in verse 17 is great as well. We always know the verse 16 very well, but 17, he goes on.
He goes on and says, for I did not come into this world to bring condemnation, but to save the world. And we talk about that as like, hey, there is good judgment. Like, hey, you have to have good judgment. You have to have good judgment in making decisions. God is a good judge because that's how he determines between good and evil, if we go to heaven or not. But what he is saying is he did not come into the world to condemn the world, because condemnation already existed in the world through the law. And so that's what he was telling Nicodemus is like, hey, you want me to come in and condemn all these people who are living unholy? Well, guess what? I came to save those unholy people. Yeah. I came here to provide a way, not just for you, but also for them. I did not come in here to condemn them. I came to save them. And so,
because that's what the law's job was to do.
Correct.
It had done its job.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's what he says. The only people that are going to be condemned is the one who do not believe in the love of Jesus and accept it over their life. Yeah. That's going to be it. He said, but people will choose that because they're going to love darkness more than they love the light.
Yeah. And even, again, for Nicodemus sitting there, everything he's saying, should he have known? Potentially. Could he have connected the dots because he would have known the prophecies and the Old Testament scrolls incredibly well? That's still a lot of dots to connect, even for someone like Nicodemus to be able to piece that puzzle together and then see it clearly and go, yeah, you are, this is it. And they're like, are you the one that we were expecting? Because we're not sure. There was plenty that Jesus did for them to be like, oh yeah, this is the guy. But there was a lot of that stuff Jesus is now saying to him. That could have been just zooming right over Nicodemus's head, and most of those Pharisees that would have known.
Well, and then the question becomes: is if they knew the Scripture better than anybody else, how did they still miss it?
I think what Jesus is saying is very complicated for most human beings.
It is complicated, but I think what they had done is they put Jesus in a box in their mind. And they had already predetermined how they thought Jesus was going to come and go.
A warrior
Yeah.
type savior,
Right.
yes, okay.
Instead of instead of being open to who Jesus is and fulfilling everything that they had said. And so even though they saw the connections, saw the different things that should have revealed who Christ is through what they knew, it didn't fit their mindset of who they thought Jesus was going to come as, and so they did not accept him.
Yeah.
In the same way, I would say, is it so hard for people to accept Jesus in their life still to this day? Because they believe that he should operate in a certain way,
Yep.
according to the way they want.
Definitely,
instead of
we
who
see
he
it
is.
from a human perspective or current circumstances perspective that God needs to do this, this, and this. And it's like, you really think you know how to tell God what
Yeah.
he needs to do? Okay, cool. Good luck with that.
Yeah, and so then we went into like, okay, so he came in to save the world. Well, the next story that we get is Jesus with the woman at the well. I know it's one of your favorite stories. Is like, but why does he follow up this story of a Samaritan woman he could put anywhere in his gospel, but yet he put it right after this story with Nicodemus?
Perfect comparison.
And so that's exactly what he's doing. He's comparing. He's like, hey, this was a religious leader that was supposed to know everything, and he missed it. He missed the love of Christ. This woman at the well, she accepted the love of Christ, and looked how it changed everything.
Well, not just any old woman, a Samaritan woman who would have been thought of as not worthy. The Israelites hated Samaritans. She's been married 5 times, so she's ostracized in her community. Yeah, she is the lowest of the low in that
which
area.
means it's sunny, which means it's hot,
Yeah.
which means women didn't go to the well when it
that
was hot.
time,
They
yeah.
went early in the morning, late at night. So this tells us not only has she been divorced 5 times, she has no friends. Yeah, I mean it is
Total
everything,
outcast.
everything.
Yeah.
The least of the least.
Yeah. And then Jesus just goes on, just continue to show love.
You're going to John 21.
He shows love of people for love of people that are at the pool that everybody just keeps ignoring. He shows up and heals people
On the
there.
Sabbath.
He shows up and loves people by feeding the 5,000. And so this is where in John's gospel you get all these signs that are pointing to him being the Messiah. He does not use miracles; he uses signs. And there's all these signs in the first part of John of him pointing to being the Messiah. And then this is where you also have all the I am sayings of who Jesus is. But then we get to, chapter 8, and another just a huge act of love is him helping the woman that was caught in adultery. And that's what we went into it on Sunday, just kind of talking about, hey, if God's love was for Nicodemus, God's love is for the woman at the well, God's love is for the woman caught in adultery, God's love is for somebody like Jelly Roll, God's love is also for you. The answer is like, you just have to accept it or reject it.
Yeah.
And so which one are you going to do? Accept it or reject it?
And that's a good way to land it in your sermon. It's a call to action. It makes people have to make a decision.
Yeah.
Are you going to choose to reject the Savior or accept him? And it might actually get people to just move for a change instead of just sitting and waiting and thinking that either they're not good enough or they need to do something else or they're whatever they're waiting for. They're not sure if they truly believe or not.
Yeah.
But
And that's what, if you truly accept him, it should change how you live your life.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the bottom line. That's true. The love you have for your spouse, it changed how you lived your life. And same thing, your love for Christ should change how you live for Christ. It
Yeah.
certainly did for John, should for us
And
as
if
well.
it hasn't,
Got to have another conversation about that.
yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
that's it. The big part of John 3 that I did not get to go over was the Jesus being raised up, just like the serpent, the snake.
Oh, that's good. Yeah.
Yeah, but that's any other questions from
Well,
John?
Roger, it's not about being quiet during the discussion. It's the next conversation that I know you're not going to be quiet
No,
on.
I was listening. I felt that it was a lot of explaining of basically where we get love in John, and basically, if you really want to experience where we find love in the book of John, start with the verse and read it, because you will find love time and time and time and time again. Again, from the very beginning, Logos, which is Jesus. In the beginning was the Word. The Word was with God. The Word was God. from there, we immediately have, okay, Jesus being encompassing what is love, and then John just goes through and through and through, and it's a great gospel. It's why when I have a new Christian or someone who's investigating the faith, I always start with John.
Yeah.
It's the first gospel I ever go to.
I do the same.
One chapter a day, 3 weeks. You will have the entire gospel, and I always make the joke. If you read the Gospel of John in 3 weeks, you have done what the majority of American Christians have never done. You've read an entire book of the Bible. Congratulations.
Yeah.
Because statistically, most Christians will never read one full book of the New Testament or Old Testament.
Yeah.
So be the minority. Go and actually read the Gospel of John. We could sit here and talk about it till we're blue in the face. You can read commentaries until you pass out, or you could just read the words of John, and you will truly understand what he's saying.
Yeah, one of my favorite things about John is how he connects Jesus way, way back to before the beginning.
Yeah.
That was one of the things that I have one of the many Bibles I have, it will reference, like if you read a verse, it will tell you, hey, this is talked about in these other places in the Bible. And I was probably kicking off a new Bible reading plan and started at Genesis chapter 1, verses 1. And as I'm going through, it tells you to go and, this refers to John chapter 1.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, okay, yeah. And then I go read John chapter. I'm like, okay. And then it tells me to go to Proverbs 8. I don't know if you're familiar with Proverbs 8, starting in verse 22. It starts digging into what wisdom is and where wisdom was at creation. And then it starts talking about it being more of a person than it is just this idea of knowing a lot of
Christology all over the place. And to say they were not, these men were not, educated or knowledgeable enough to do that accidentally, or even to do it intentionally in a way to try to
completely different writers,
cheat the system,
and way different spans of time,
and
hundreds and hundreds of years of difference in time.
I remember reading John 1 as a new Christian and thinking, this is stupid. Like, what does this mean? The Word was with God. The Word, what does that mean? And then when you actually start to study it, and of course, when I was a Mormon, we didn't talk this passage a lot at all, because this is the passage that we now know and we can now prove to show what John is saying, that in the beginning, which is eternity in God's eyes and in God's world, Jesus was in that. And so just incredible stuff.
But it was cool. So I was able to, when that came to light to me, it was also kind of neat, because obviously God says, and then God reveals light. But yet you always, in Genesis 1, you always think of that light being the sun, S-U-N, but that doesn't show up until, I think, verse 14. And so what is this light that then enters into the darkness? It's the revealing, not the creation of Christ, but the revealing of Christ, which then John talks about, Proverbs talks about, which there was the master craftsman of creation, and found his delight in the creation of man. But what was kind of cool is that was one of my first sermons I was able to preach here at FBC many years ago. You would be shocked at how many longtime churchgoers came up to me afterwards and said, I never knew that, and I learned something today. I had so many come up to me, I started questioning myself, is this correct? Did I say something wrong? Because all these people I thought of, and after the podcast, I'll tell you some names if you want, but it's kind of that you would have thought, you should have known that.
Yeah.
You are in your 60s, and you should have been going to this church your whole life, and you didn't know that connection.
Yeah.
And I was very surprised by that. So surprised I almost thought, I might get called into the office because I might have preached something I shouldn't have said. Oh, but by the way, that did happen. One time I did preach, and the next day I got called into the pastor's office. He says, hey, somebody got a complaint about your sermon. And I'm like, oh, no. And he says, it's okay.
Was it Barney?
No. This was several years ago.
Okay.
And he goes, yeah, somebody said that I should never let you on the stage because you are saying that Jesus is God. And I'm like, huh? He goes, oh, yeah. And he's just like, it's okay. You did good. I'm like, and then they went on to say, he goes, to reply, his reply to the person was, if there's a lot of things I have, grown to understand in theology as the years go by, but there is one thing that will never change.
Yeah.
And that is Jesus will always be God.
That's fascinating. I mean, you cannot by definition be a Christian and not believe that Jesus is God. Like, that is,
hey, was the complaint from Roger back when he was a
Might
Mormon?
have been, maybe.
It might have been you from back when you were a Mormon.
I mean, that is like,
Yeah.
I can't even think of an analogy of how dumb. See, like you're about, because if that was me, I would be like, I need to know who said that. So I can go, in all seriousness, I need to know who said it so I can go share the gospel with them because they're not saved.
Pastor Matt did that very much so in
Good.
the moment.
Okay.
So.
But like,
in what you said, I can't tell you how many people came up and told me I never knew that about John.
Yeah.
Like, thank you.
See, and I think that's something that we need to understand as pastors is we assume that people know a lot about the Bible and they know little details like just who is John and what was his story. So I'll just ask you this way. When have we ever talked about who John is or any of the apostles and their backstory, key, details of, say, even Luke, who wrote his gospel, Luke and Acts, these backstories to these gospels? When was the last time we ever taught or spoke about those?
I did it last year with Matthew, and I went back to when he was Levi and at the table and all of that stuff. And I remember I had several people tell me, we had no idea Matthew was Levi. And it's like...
One time. That's only, and now you're twice.
What's the last time? I'm trying to. I mean, if we go back over the years, I know I did it with Paul, who was an apostle, but like, no, probably with John. No, I don't think so.
I would say the vast majority of our sermons are topical because we're following a sermon series.
Yeah.
Obviously, this is a sermon series, but it allowed the opportunity to say, this is who John is, and this is who he saw as Jesus.
Yep.
And this is why he wrote his gospel the way he did. And it helps you can then give that backstory, and people go, oh. Because I thoroughly enjoy learning the context of any given book of the Bible before reading the book.
Yeah.
Because it will come into so much new light and understanding, and it just helps people, oh, that makes perfect sense now. So then to explain why would John write what he wrote, just opens it up even more, and it makes it 3D basically. So
I enjoyed studying.
I think we need to do it more often because I think it'll help people.
We asked Jaden a question. Who talked about love more, Paul or John?
Had to have been Paul. He wrote way more than. I mean, John wrote one gospel and a few letters. Paul wrote over
all
half
the
New
different
Testament.
like Greek words for love. You know that there's like 4 or 3 or 4.
Agape.
All those.
Yeah.
Paul used what was it, Jaden, over 120 times throughout his letters. So it's pretty close.
Did you just read his mind or something? Because he didn't say that, did he?
What?
Did Jaden say that?
Yeah, he texted me.
Oh, okay, gotcha. I was about to say I didn't hear him say that.
I didn't.
We were in mid conversation.
120. Okay, that makes sense.
120 times.
Well, and like I said,
And what was John's?
50?
We know it was over 100. Well, 57 is just his gospel, and then you count in his letters.
First, second, third John.
Then how many total?
Over 100. Well,
So
at least
who wins?
103.
I think Paul.
Paul, 120 over 103. Okay.
But Paul, he wrote 14.
He wrote more letters,
I mean,
yeah.
it depends on if you give him the author of Hebrews.
So
but he wrote
frequency.
He didn't. No, he didn't write Hebrews. Come on, it's a different conversation.
Anyways,
yeah. Well, that's a good, like, I do think it's a, in part of this podcast, we said like, hey, we're going to address things going on throughout the world. This past weekend was a big, a lot of things happened this weekend, talking about what's going on with Iran and different things like that. And I had even a few people come up and ask, like, I thought you were going to say something on Sunday about it because we talk about things that are going on and we prepare the flock. So it brings a question, talking about it. What should our Christian response be to what is going on in America's role with Iran right now? What do we do?
It's a great question.
drill, baby, drill. Oh, is that
was Sarah
something
Palin.
else?
Yeah,
that's a different.
It goes back to 2008.
I guess there is a oil
McCain.
involved.
There's always oil involved.
Well, it's obviously complicated, and it has a deep, deep history of things going on involving Iran and then connected to Israel. Pretty much my whole life is Iran has been nothing but a problem.
Yeah.
Growing up, 80s, there was the Iran-Iraq war, which is a proxy war between us and Russia, basically. But they were at each other's throats constantly as neighbors. And then shift gears, then we are kicking Iraq out of Kuwait, and then fast forward a little bit more, and we have 9/11, and just that whole region has been nothing but turmoil forever. And Iran is kind of always at the center of all of it. And I also know that Iran has said numerous times they wanted to wipe Israel off the face of the map. So that's a problem. You can't have that. And obviously Israel is one of our friends, and we're going to stand up for them and back them. Not that they really need our help. I think they have more weapon systems than we do, more advanced than we do for the size of the country they are. But I think President Trump has just finally had enough of these things going on in the world, the war on the cartels in Mexico. I mean, there's a reason why he labeled them as now terrorists, because now he can tell Mexico, Either you take care of them or we will. And since they really didn't do anything, now special forces have taken out one of the biggest cartel leaders. Venezuela, same thing. Now we have Iran, and then I don't know if you've seen some headlines, people saying Cuba, question mark, next. And so I think it's just to the point where people are sick and tired of it. We did go and destroy their nuclear facilities, but they didn't. They're going to just start rebuilding it again. Yeah. They're not going to stop. They're never going to stop. But there is something going on with the Iranian population, though. I think they've had enough. I think they've had enough of the oppression, and they have no freedom. And I think I think some of this is even that Trump is backing his words to the population that we will help you. And they've been crying out, please help us, because how many have been killed for the protests? Over 3,000 Iranian civilians were killed in protests. Mm-hmm. And I think it's just Trump backing up what he said he would do. And he always does.
Yeah. It's very much a move of peace through strength. And I think, in this, we always want to run to like the political side. Well, what's the real meaning, the different things behind that? But just from the very basic, as Christians, what can we do right now? And is it getting in a major debate of should we be doing this? Should we not? Is this what is best for America? Is it not? Christian wise, what are we called to do in it all? And number one, I think we would say what God has called us to do, coming off of John, is to pray and to love. And that is what we are called to do. Now, what does the most loving thing require of us in this action? I think right now, we can't say for certain maybe what that is, but what we can do is pray. We can pray for, number one, our troops that are over there fighting, that they be protected. We pray for their families. Number two, I think a major thing is pray for the Iranian people. Yeah. That freedom would come upon that place, that salvation would fall upon that place. And, and then number three, pray, but also, again, just be aware. I'd go back to the podcast a couple weeks ago when we talked about Islam, right? And the people that are living in Iran that's underneath that Islamic leadership there, and the Christians that are fearing for their life over there. Yeah. And so I'd be praying for revival to take place over there in Iran as well, and salvation would flood across. I mean, what one of the leaders in Iran just this past weekend, after everything took place, he declared jihad against America and Israel, and essentially saying that it is their religious duty to bring death to Americans and Israelis after what took place this weekend. And putting it in the name of religion,
which is nothing new. They've been
nothing new, but
chanting "Death to America" in the streets since before I was in the womb, and we'll see.
And I think again,
but I think things like this can be a catalyst to open the door for missionary organizations to be able to make more of a move into a country where before it was very underground, where they had to be secretly reaching people with the gospel in countries like in Iran. It may now then open up that opportunity where it's a lot easier for the gospel to get access with a regime removing a specific leader or group of leaders that are absolutely against it. You never know. I mean, God is still in charge, and so it's just. And if that's the what the leaders are saying, death to Israel, death to Americans, they're not a Christian nation. You can't help but just say that there's an opposing force behind it, and God is going to take that opposing force out, in one way or another. So
the Iranian, according to their data, they're 100% Islam, but studies show that they are probably 98% practicing Islam, most of that from the Sharia branch of Islam. And, of course, their constitution was signed in 1979, is a strict interpretation of 12er Jafari Shia Sharia law, which enforces mandatory hijab, strict gender segregation, severe penalties, flogging, amputation, execution for offenses such as adultery, alcohol consumption, and enmity against God. And so a lot of that is Islamic language. Even the people in Iran that are more nominal studies show believe in that. They believe in Sharia law. So the question is okay, you remove a government. What's the next one going to look like? What's the next administration going to look like? We know we're predominantly dealing with Islam, and most of them do not resemble the Muslims that we have met. I mean, this is a different type.
Yeah.
The numbers we shared last time, give us indication of that as well. So then the question is, let's say best case scenario, this regime's been removed, the new one sprouts up because there'll always be a new one. They are going to believe in the same principles that the last one did, unless they're outside of the 90.
That sprouting up is assuming there's not going to be any active involvement on our part on helping pick that leader. Like, say, rewind to Iraq.
Like Iraq, yeah.
They got to vote. Mm-hmm. They got to have the freedom to vote and to choose in a legitimate election.
Yeah.
The pink or the purple finger, I got to vote and I didn't get killed, and I got to pick who I wanted to vote for. There's going to change some things. It's not just going to be another Ayatollah popping
So then
up.
we would have to argue then, if that's the case, 6,000 to 8,000 deaths in Iraq, American deaths, in order to get that to happen, a decade of boots on the ground. If our goal here is to make a snap decision and then exit, then that's probably not going to happen.
There's no way we are exiting.
Well,
and I would
there's
say
a lot
that
of
the
wishful
longer
thinkers.
we're there, the longer stability will stick around.
I think there's a lot of wishful thinkers that are hoping that this is a quick, expedited thing, kind of like the Venezuela thing. Okay, we did the act, and now hopefully you leave it at that. This is obviously a very different type of situation. And the one thing we do know about Iraq,
We will have a presence.
well, and so the question would be in hindsight, and we can compare Iraq to Iran, not just the Alan Jackson song, but the war of. When Bush declared war in Iraq, which is 2003, his approval rating was as high as it would be. After 9/11 was when it was the highest, but it only went down after he declared war. By the end of his administration, I want to say his approval rating was around 30%. It led to two terms.
It was high 20s, low 30s.
It led to two terms of President Obama. If you remember the Obama-McCain debates, McCain, his only talk, really what his talking point turned into was to distance himself from the war in Iraq. That was Obama's main talking point against Obama, against McCain, was the idea that you were on Bush's side. Bush declared war, and now, I would say,
And then he lost.
McCain lost.
Yeah.
Yes.
And he was not.
Because I think people believed that. I think people believed that in the beginning McCain was a proponent of the war in Iraq. And I think political scientists would tell you that the war in Iraq, the after effects of the war in Iraq probably cost the GOP a solid decade of power.
So would you say it was a bad thing that we removed Saddam Hussein?
For the what it cost, yes, and based off of why we allegedly did it, for weapons of mass destruction, which did not exist, and based off of the information that Rumsfeld and Cheney and Rice gave us, which all turned out to be bad information. I think in hindsight, yes, I'm glad Saddam was killed. Saddam was a terrible dictator. There were several more worse dictators than Saddam at the time when we talk about body count.
Yeah, but I'd even question Saddam Hussein had 0 weapons of mass destruction. That 0 were found in Iraq when we moved through there.
Well, the intel, I mean, the Bush administration.
I know that's
by
what
the end of
news
it,
said.
Well,
they may have moved a lot of things in the process of us getting to them.
Well,
but there's absolutely no way Iraq had 0 weapons of mass destruction.
My recollection was that
up.
Bush more or less recanted and basically said, yes, the information we had was not correct.
And it can happen, but I'll still go back to is Iraq in a better place now today? I don't hear anything about Iraq in the news much. The bad things going on, like it was when I grew up in the 80s, and that place was just nothing but war-torn, destruction, constant fighting, people dying, bombs going off constantly at each other's throats all around them. I don't hear that anymore with regards to Iraq.
I don't believe Iraq was a threat to American lives. I don't believe. So the question would be, yes, I believe Iran can probably improve. They have the opportunity to improve based off of what is being done. The question is when do the ends justify the means of, if our responsibility is the freedom of Middle Eastern countries that may or may not impact what is happening here on American soil, where we have a fentanyl crisis, we have everything that is going on in our country. and the problems that I think we need to be focused on. My question is how many American lives could potentially be impacted by what is going on in Iran? Now, the answer, based off of the information they have, which none of us have, may be, hey, no, there is an imminent threat that we cannot reveal right now because we don't want the enemy to have our playbook. And if that's the case, then I'm going to be able to look back in 10 years and say, man, he needs a Nobel Peace Prize for what he did because he absolutely did save lives. The problem is we're so early on in this process.
For sure.
But I will always be, and I'm sure you two would agree with this, America first. And I will always look at the idea of war or foreign conflict has to be the necessary evil of all evils.
Yeah, but you're also you're focusing in did it save American lives? I don't know. Probably still, Iran has a lot of reach with its terror network, and
they have for 37 years.
Just like we went into Iraq the first time, they invaded one of our friends, and we're going to back up our friend Kuwait at the time. Saddam Hussein went into Kuwait, and George H.W. Bush said, "No, you don't."
Well,
and after our Air Force and Stormin' Norman came rolling in, knocked him out,
short scalp
in 5 days or something like that.
So the question is, obviously, nobody can question our loyalty to our friends.
Is it worth it to go help our friends?
Yeah.
And to go literally finally, Luke, you would use this because you said the words I was thinking. Cut the head off the snake.
Yeah. Is it worth it to shed blood, American blood, to save the blood of our friends?
But it's not just the blood of our friends. There's been over 1,000 Americans die from Iran.
In most cases, the answer to that is no, in my opinion. It's just me. And so
But then that's like my question, but how many Americans would have to die before we go and do something? If 1,000 of us have died at the hands of Iran since 1979, when is it going to be too much? And that's all another conversation debate.
How many Americans have died since 1999?
1979.
Since 1979?
1,000.
What's the average of that?
I don't know. I don't think it matters.
Based on years?
Yeah. I mean, how many and what do those I would be interested. I agree with those statistics. I would want to see what are we talking about in those deaths. I would also want to compare American deaths in other Middle Eastern similar countries to see what the numbers are in the grand scheme of things, to say, okay, this is exclusively an issue with the Iranian government, and if this Ayatollah would not have been there, because Ahmadinejad was the leader at one point. He was making similar threats, and we've had leaders in Iran that hate America. I doubt we're ever going to have an America-loving leader in Iran. Like, I don't think that's going to happen in our lifetime. Based off of their own doctrine, and that's where I think this is not necessarily an issue with countries. This is an issue with ideology.
Yeah.
Going back to what we talked about when it comes to Islam and Sharia law and jihad and a lot of the beliefs that, unfortunately, it's very difficult to eradicate a belief. That's the hard part.
Well, this is
again, I would say then that's the power of the gospel.
Yeah.
If it has the opportunity to move in, it will change beliefs. It has that power.
I agree.
To change
I agree
beliefs.
theologically. That's not the argument that this administration is making on doing so. We can 100% have a theological agreement.
Well, I don't know if that's his underlying reason, but I would say that Trump's plan in that area is peace. And you have one
I would agree with that.
awful place in the midst of all those Abraham Accords and all those neighbors around Israel that are signing peace deals that don't understand why they hated Israel, and they're finally saying, you know what, I think we can put that behind us. Let's go at peace with each other. The one that they could not get right and kept on saying we're going to wipe them off the face of the map, and kept building nuclear arsenals. We helped them many a times in previous administrations with the money we gave them. Why? That is another conversation. But I think Trump's finally said, this is it. We're tired of this. And what they are going to do to our ally of Israel, whether you want to call him an ally or not.
Well, I think
some
they're
people will
100%
disagree. I think
it's a very one-sided allyship. I mean, we have shown our loyalty to them. There's no doubt about that.
This is what I want to get at.
Well,
I'm
I
not
think
saying
people use the biblical reason as to why it's very much a one way. Whether they're accurate or not, I don't know.
Depending
but-
on, are we dealing
Yeah.
with a biblical
True
Israel?
Israel,
Are we
yeah.
dealing with a
True, but
modernized?
I think that's their
you know?
reasoning. That's why we continue to back them.
And I'm
is the
kind of
biblical reason.
I'm kind of agnostic on that. I understand the arguments from both sides. I heard the Tucker Huckabee conversation. I thought was really good. I thought Huckabee did a great job explaining kind of this is why we believe that, and obviously Tucker's made it very clear on why he believes that this is a modernized version that is not indicative of the Old Testament Israel. Be that as it may, I'm not one to complain about our relationship with Israel. I'm very sympathetic to Christian Zionism. I think that there's good points to that. However, again, my focus will always be American troops, boots on the ground. I remember in 2003, 10 years old, I remember my stepdad going off to his second tour. I vividly remember hugging him as he was leaving the house, and my mom sitting me down and saying, he will be in combat, and being explained, this is what is going on, and this is what he is allegedly fighting for. And so for me, you hate to make everything personal. I understand, and thankfully he did come home. I think he was gone for 10 months. He came home. He left again, went to South Korea the second time. That was short. He wasn't in combat, came home, and then he retired. But that's a very real thing. Mm-hmm. And I think we've been blessed so far in the Trump administration. Say what you want about him. We haven't had to go back to that of, okay, we need to send X amount of boots on the ground. We've sent soldiers out, but not to the level of what we were seeing in Iraq or the Gulf War or anything like that. And so my fear is, what is the long game? What does this look like? And I hate to be the one that's always blaring World War III, because I don't think we're close to World War III, but I think we're closer today than we were last week.
Well, this is what I'd say. Whether you agree or disagree with what took place this past weekend, as Christians, what we can focus in on, what we do know what was going in Iran with our brothers and sisters in Christ, is that they are heavily persecuted for what they believe. It is illegal for them to operate in an official capacity as a church. Therefore, what we know is, as Christians, our brothers and sisters are having to have church underground and in secret, and many of them being persecuted for what they believe if it becomes known, especially if they are moving from Islam to Christianity. So I think out of everything, what we can be praying for is that there'd be freedom of religion that would fall upon Iran, that salvations would take place.
Which is not attached to an administration, it's attached to a law, which has been in effect since 1970.
But this, what I'm saying is through this, I'm saying it is possible that whether you agree or disagree, you can still pray that God would use this as an opportunity to bring freedom to Iran,
sure,
like where Christians can come to know Jesus.
Because so much of the time after things like this happen, humanitarian efforts move in and start coming in and start helping the people. And who's to say that a Samaritan's Purse isn't a part of that? Who's to say other Christian organizations aren't a part of that? And in that, they're able to start to share a gospel story, and the floodgates just start to open. How fascinating would that be?
Yeah. My final point is that a lot of it is assumptions right now, and we're still very early on in this. We don't have all the information, even in Hegseth's press conference. I mean, they flat out asked him, are there boots on the ground? He said, we're not going to give away our playbook. So, they're keeping their cards close to their chest.
Smart.
Praise the Lord.
I think
listen, I'm not. I'm saying that's a good thing. I agree. Hegseth.
Do you ever see the old Saturday Night Lives of Gulf War I? The
Yeah.
reporters would say, "So what's your next move? And what are they going to be the next?" And it's like, really? Do you think we're that stupid?
Exactly.
We're going to announce on a news conference?
I like Hegseth.
I loved that part of his interview. He's like, are you not listening to what I'm saying? Because they just kept asking, so what's the game plan here, blah, blah. He's like, we're not going to tell you. But we're not going to tell our enemies what we're going to be doing.
That's why I use the word assumption, is that there has to be some level of assumptions, because we don't have near the answers that we did in 03 and in 04, and so that's a good thing. I'm not complaining. And that's why I'm very much a wait and see approach. What I'm saying today is more of my general stance, and I'm applying that to something that I know very little about, which is the Iranian intervention right now. I want to be a hopeful optimist. I want to feel how you feel. But I've seen regime change after regime change in the Middle East. It is an ideological issue. It is not a governmental issue. That is oftentimes the problem, is that you have the ideology that is dominating. And who's to say the next regime is not going to be worse than this one? Because they can get worse, and they have been worse. So who's to say we go back to what you said. Well, that's why we have to intervene, and that's why we got to have boots on the ground and make sure
I
it's done
wasn't saying
correctly.
we have to. I'm not
Well,
saying
that's
we
an
have
option.
to put boots on
it's
the
an
ground.
option. No, but that's an option that we go in and we prolong our stay to make sure that that's done. That's great. But then are we talking more American lives? That's the point.
I'm looking back on history, going back to say World War II, where World War against Germany and Japan, we have a presence in Germany and Japan, and now we're allies with them, and they're much better places. Fast forward, I don't know about Vietnam, but we tried, but it was also a lot of other reasons why that didn't go well.
I think most historians would say Vietnam was a disaster.
Yeah, but Iraq even, I'd say that things in Iraq are much more improved than what they used to be.
They're still under Sharia law.
They are able to vote.
Yeah.
Whether it's legitimate voting still or not, I don't know. But that one time that I remember with the purple fingers, they got to legitimately vote in safety and get to pick who they wanted to vote for. I would say we're still there. Yeah. Afghanistan, that's a whole nother story. I think it's an Afghanistan problem.
Well, separate
but
Middle East.
What I'm getting at is there is a history of we go against a bully that's bullying the world and killing thousands and thousands or millions of people or threatening to. We go in. The rest of the world is too chicken to stand up to them. We finally say, cut it out, and if you don't, we're going to take care of this. We finally have a leader of our country that means what he says. And because for so long, Iran is like, whatever. You've said that a million times. You're not going to do anything. Trump is a different story. The potbelly dictator in North Korea is very quiet.
He's still killing his own people.
His own people, but I have not heard him threaten about launching a rocket our way.
He's been quiet. He's been playing
He's been really quiet.
Real quick.
But let me finish my point, is that every time we go through to clean things up or to confront a bully, we take out the bully and then we do our best to fix it and make it a better place.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's opposition to that. There's obviously, we're dealing with humans and politics, and it doesn't always come out the way we probably would really hope for it to come out. But there is a history that it has worked. Germany, Japan. I would say Iraq was for a time. I don't know if it still is.
I think those are inadmissible because they were industrialized nations and they weren't dominated by Islamic ideology. Germany was an industrialized nation. Germany was predominantly monotheistic Christian. There was not a large Islamic presence in Germany. There certainly wasn't an Islamic presence.
They were trying to wipe a human race off the planet.
Oh, 100%. What I'm saying is in terms of the people. I'm not talking about the government. Certainly the Third Reich was as evil gets. I'm not doubting that. What I'm saying is that predating Hitler, predating the Nazis, that Germany was an industrialized nation. Their religious and ideological belief system was pretty tame. That is completely opposite of what we're dealing with when we're talking about these Middle Eastern
Iran's
countries.
pretty good at nuclear weapons and suitcase bombs.
They are good at that, but that says nothing about ideology. The difference is, though, like they in their religious text, many of them believe to use it. And we're not just talking about the radical governmental leaders of Iran. We're talking a lot of the Fannie Mae's and Freddie Mac's, the John Does and Jane Does of Iran. Statistically, a huge chunk of them believe in death to America. That has nothing to do with the government. It has to do with ideology.
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's no war that will just radically change an ideology.
Armageddon.
That's where the Holy Spirit. Well,
the Armageddon War.
Yeah, but that's where the Holy Spirit. It is only through the Holy Spirit.
But I also think this is leading up to something bigger and biblical. You referenced Ezekiel and what Jesus referenced in his conversation with Nicodemus. Ezekiel also talks about a time where there will be peace around Israel to the point they have no walls and they have no weapons. Their only weapon is a shovel anymore. That is the peace in that area. And then is it Gog that comes down from the north, and everybody thinks that's Russia, whatever, who knows what it is.
A lot of speculation.
Then God allows them to go in to show how powerful God is and how he continues to protect Israel when they are completely defenseless. So I don't know. If you look at it from a 30,000-foot view and from a biblical perspective, that's one less enemy to Israel, if it is the same Israel, whatever.
Which I think it's a good argument that
peace to that land.
Yeah,
and there could very well you remove that threat of Iran in that area, and then you add in all these Abraham Accords and all these peace deals. It's still question mark if the Hezbollah is going to be a long-term peace deal, but that's a huge one as well. After that, there's not much of a threat to Israel. After that, in that area, assuming
in all caps that the Iranian intervention goes exactly the way we think it can go.
And I think that
and the
is-
next regime is
yeah.
actually, they actually become buddies with Israel, and they actually love Israel. That's not
They
gonna
don't have to
happen.
be buddies and they don't have to love each other, but they're not a threat.
Yeah.
They're not actively saying we're going to remove you from the face of the planet.
I don't want to be pessimistic. I just find that because I know what this ideology is, and I know what it looks like, and yeah, that very well could happen.
But that's why, as Christians, I'm like, this, no matter what you think about it, this is potentially an open door for more freedom of religion in that area.
That opens the door to the power of the gospel to
By the way, there
salvation.
hasn't been a Christian boom in Iraq if you look at the numbers, just so you know. Yes, they're voting, but there's not a Christian boom. The last time I looked at it, the Islamic population is roughly the same today as it was in the... So if
I go to our IMB map, I've noticed how when India is changing, China is nearly a Christian nation, and the Middle East was no longer solid red. It was now orange moving into green.
Yeah.
It's changing.
Iraq's population, 2024, estimated 95 to 99% in the country of Iraq. That's 2024, according to Wikipedia. Point being...
But I'm
yes,
going off of
if we're going to make
IMB's
theological
reached
arguments,
versus
and that's
I
what-
promise you,
'cause
Trump's
this
not
is-
making any theological arguments.
As the Make Heaven Crowded podcast, like, what is our role in all of this? What can we do? What we can hope for is we all hate Islam. As a Christian, you hate the religion of Islam. You have to. And so, therefore, we would pray that in Iran, that we would see revival take place, that we would hopefully see religious freedoms take place, where our Christian brothers and sisters no longer have to meet underground in churches, but they can start sharing the gospel with their loved ones, and
Agreed.
they come to know Christ.
I hope-
That's what we can pray for and hope for.
We pray for all lost people, whether
Yeah.
it be the Muslims in Iran, whether it be the lost people in our streets, whether it be our president. I hope that lost people, the gospel is shared to them, that they accept it, that it absolutely penetrates their heart, and that they're ambushed by the love of God.
But I'd say
we agree on that.
I'm more hopeful for the gospel to be shared now in Iran today than I was a week ago.
Yeah, a week ago we were talking about. Can you
Say that again, Luke? I'm sorry. I
More
missed-
hopeful that the gospel can be spread and shared throughout Iran now than I was a week ago.
I'm also more hopeful in a bad way of World War III this week than I was last week. So we could balance that.
What's
I don't
the-
think World War III is going to happen.
Who would be? Is that Russia wants to step in?
Well,
or,
and there's always going to be a China, role play. I think Russia plays as well.
I don't
that's
think
a
Russia
different.
has the ability.
That's
to
a different.
Right now.
Well, and they didn't have the ability in World War II either. That's why you have allies and you have the axis of evil and all that stuff. I don't. By the way, I'm not calling my shot. I don't think we're going to have World War III. I think that the conversation was not a conversation last week. 2 weeks ago, we were talking about Trump retweeting a monkey video. Like, what? Can we go back to 2 weeks ago? Like, my goodness. So,
Yeah.
anyways, that's
Well,
all I'll say on that. I am pro-Israel, but I am pro-America. I'll leave it at that.
So I am pulling up a map of our IMB global status of evangelical Christianity, and I look at the Middle East, and there is a lot of red, but actually Iran is yellow. That means they are engaged with the gospel.
Look at Iraq.
They're no longer unreached, unengaged. They are now engaged with the gospel. The next step is churches being planted where it then becomes green.
Jaden, he'll share that with you if you.
What does Iraq look like?
I've got to find it here. There's Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iraq. It doesn't show a border very well. Is it south of Iran, basically? It's all dark.
So that's my point. We gave them a democracy. We get them to vote, and guess what?
I
The
can't
ideology
find it,
stays
actually.
the
It
same.
doesn't
That's
show
my
Iraq.
point. Checkmate.
No, it's not showing where
Yeah, I
Iraq
know.
is.
But what
I've
I'm
got
saying
to
is
find
that
it. And I'm doing this on my phone,
There hasn't.
too. So.
That's what I'm saying. That there hasn't been some ideological radical shift. And yes, they're voting. Yes, they got to choose their own leader. And yet, it.
No, you can't say that. I just can't find it on this
I know.
map.
I'm basing.
right
I'm
now.
directly to
basing,
the left
I'm
of
basing it off. Of,
Okay, so that's very much yellow.
okay.
Very-
Here's
it's
another.
That whole
directly to the
region of
left.
Iran and Iraq, Afghanistan is awful red still with some sprinklings of yellow, but
It's in between Syria and Iran. That's where Iraq is.
yeah, it's
it's-
yellow.
Here's a 2019 report from
changing.
the report on international religious freedom in Iraq. Needle hasn't been moved much since the war.
But the difference is that is taking how people what they're saying they are, and you're not going to in those countries find.
No,
people
I
saying
think
that
I
they're
think in
Christians.
this report,
definitely
This
takes
is
time.
This is talking about missionaries on the ground.
Missionaries on the ground, the
Sharing the
gospel
gospel.
reach.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know what it says.
Infiltration
I don't know
of the
the data
gospel.
on that. I'm basing the data. This isn't just a poll. This is, I think, in these types of stuff. There's the study on Middle Eastern concern in Iraq. That Shia Muslim is dominating 2/3 Shia Muslim, 1/3 Sunni Muslim, Christian and other minorities under 2%. And so, I mean, we could go through the.
That's because
Yeah,
the question
but-
on those polls are they coming and knocking on doors and saying, "Are you Christian?"
Yeah,
or Muslim?
I
And
would
they're
be
going to be
interested,
like, "Yeah, I'm Muslim," because they're not going to.
But
I mean,
here's the thing: we're having a secular.
you're gonna say
we're
that-
having a secular debate because if Donald Trump's at this table, he's going to say, He doesn't care about any of that, right? We can have the theological debate of okay, we can hope, but if we're going to start invading non-countries on the basis of maybe spreading the gospel in that country, then we better hit every country outside of
and
North
I'm not
America.
saying that's why we should do it. I'm saying that's
a silver lining of going to war.
As Christians, what can we focus on right now? Okay, God could use this as an opportunity for us to
Yeah.
share the gospel, and that's what we need to be praying for.
And that goes without saying.
You can look at a poll, but I'm looking at planted churches. And so China, you
I
would
thought
say
you said it was dark. That's why I was responding to that.
I
No,
couldn't
Iraq,
find the actual location.
Okay, well,
of Iraq
without
within
seeing it,
that.
then I can't
But no,
respond.
it was if it's just to the left, it's yellow still. But I'm going to go look at it on my computer.
Okay.
It shows up much better than on my phone. But let's say China. You would say China is probably what would that their main religion be? What would you say?
I mean,
Buddhist?
Buddhism or atheism, but of course the underground movement with Christianity. The difference is it's not you don't get your head cut off in China for preaching the gospel.
you go to
get arrested.
education camps.
Yes, you do, but that has
And there's
that
a
has,
lot of persecution
that
going
has
on in
lessened.
China.
And Francis Chan has written a lot about this.
So-
that has lessened, thankfully, in recent history.
I don't know what the percentage of Christianity is versus Buddhism or atheism in China, but that's the map
Yeah,
of China.
it's incredible.
The map of China is green.
It's also
that
not-
means reached, and that means planted churches. And I know our International Mission Board was saying that by 2025, and I haven't heard whether they've claimed it or not, or that's been extended, but China was going to be believed to be a Christian nation. We're considered a Christian nation. They would be at our same level of Christianity in China.
Yeah.
And so I can't go off of a poll. I'm going to go off of what our Christian brothers and sisters in the International Mission Board that track this nonstop, and that's their
Agreed.
job.
And if China, I think is different again.
I mean, like even look at India.
Because of Islam.
Although it looks like there's a lot of yellow and red, it used to be solid red.
Yeah.
And is now all yellow. And if you zoomed in more, you're going to see sprinkles of green, as you can see. And where we used to go in Chindwara, it's now green. It's
Three
kinda
differences:
cool.
Buddhist country, Hindu country, Islam country. That's the difference.
Yeah, Hindu is pretty dark. And they get a lot of persecution there too. But don't minimize the power
But
of
I
the
don't
gospel.
think. Well, I'm not minimizing. Please don't say that any of this is minimizing the gospel. We're looking
power
at
of the gospel
We're
to
looking at a
salvation.
practical foreign policy. What I don't like is when people use spiritual manipulation in order to support conflict on other countries. That's
and I
what
hope
I'm not
that's
saying.
not what you hear I'm saying.
No.
I'm saying,
but I'm saying in terms
don't
of like,
care.
don't minimize the gospel or don't lessen the power of the gospel. Nobody's lessening the power of the gospel.
This could be just
the
the open
Bhagavad
door to
Gita. The Bhagavad Gita in Hinduism does not talk about jihad against infidels, and so again, there is a doctrinal difference
Yeah.
in that.
sure.
Buddhism,
But there is a
you know,
lot of Muslim Islam in India as well. I mean,
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
anyways, you want to tell them what the $5 bill was for?
Yeah, this was.
See, and now I regret talking about it because I'm just fired up, and there's
This
been really
was,
no gospel centered to it.
Roger said he really wasn't going to go into the conversation when we started.
He was
going
gonna
to
stay quiet.
And Jordan put $5 on that. That would not happen,
I'm not
that
collecting my $5.
He would.
I'm
That
collecting
he would
$5.
I said
so-
I'm not collecting $5.
This
I
goes
know.
to Jordan. So yeah, good job.
Well, I
Good
need
call.
another 5.
There you go.
Yeah, there you go.
That'll help.
Needs to come. This was my 5. There should be another 5 to accompany it.
Yeah, there might be.
I don't think that was the deal. I didn't put any fives on the table because
All right.
I knew I would lose it.
Anyway, fun conversation. Thank you for joining us today as we got to talk about love and talk about what's going on throughout the world. And so until next week, got excited as we continue rediscovering Jesus on Sunday. But until then, go make heaven crowded.